radio folks that we will give this to them at 6:58. And that means that between now and 6:58, you get to hear from me and from Tom Cross. And so my name is Becky Sherrick, and I'm president of AU. We know that people will be coming in the next few minutes, but my job is to welcome you to the campus, to this exciting gubernatorial candidate debate. Several folks have asked me questions about this, and what I can tell you is if there's a primary challenge on the Republican side, we'll be out the door with an invitation quickly there too, because we really see our job as a university community as providing as many opportunities as possible for our friends and neighbors and our students, faculty, staff, and parents to stay in touch with the important issues in today's environment. So we're happy to have you here. I'd like to introduce to you Tom Cross, who most of you already know. Tom came to AU after an amazingly successful public career in the General Assembly, where he served in a variety of capacities, but particularly as minority leader. It's been a thrill for us to have Tom at AU, and so I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Tom Cross.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I have to confess, this is my first Democrat debate that I've ever been to. So I'm kind of excited for a lot of reasons. I want to acknowledge a few people. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the chairman of the Kane County Democratic Party, Mark Gately. And Mark is here tonight. Mark is, we went to Mark and said, you know, we have an idea for a part of our Town Square series, the idea of a debate or a conversation, a forum. And he said, we like that idea here in Kane County. Let me do what I can to make it happen. And he did what he could and got all of the candidates here. And it has been a great partnership. And we're very fortunate to be able to have, I think, that relationship with Mark. I've enjoyed working with him, as has the AU community. I also want to thank Rick Pearson with WGN Radio. He has the Morning Spin show on Sunday mornings and also writes for the Tribune. And he has been an incredible partner and ally in putting this together. And his advice and direction on how we want to make this happen has been monumental. I think for some of you, you know about our Town Square series. Some of you don't. And the idea was the idea of the presidency, and we started it about a year and a half, 2 years ago, was how are we going to, as a country and as a society, as a state, tackle tough issues when we're not even talking, when we can't come together, when we can't attack an issue and not the person. And the idea was, let's have very difficult issues and educate people on what they are and look at the solutions. And we've had a variety of good topics and good conversation. Well, tonight's a little different. We're not going to talk about specific issues, but we're going to hear from the people that are going to be tackling those issues, not only during this campaign, but ultimately one of them on either side of the aisle, as Becky said, we'll have a Republican debate if we need to, may very well be the governor. So we're excited about that tonight, and I appreciate their willingness to be here. I want to also thank the Arts and Ideas sponsors who make events like this happen. And in addition to that, I want to thank the underwriters, Painters District Council 14, Painters District Council 30, and the Fox Valley Building Trades. And I also want to thank you. What I have really enjoyed about the Town Square series and having the difficult issues that need to be discussed, but this community of not just Aurora University, but the greater Aurora community and the greater Fox Valley, people have wanted to be here to listen to the issues, to talk about the issues and engage. And to me, that says a very, very positive thing about this community and this university, that while people in this country are cynical and tired about what's going on in the political process, people in this community want to be part of solving problems. And that says a lot about our community, and we're very fortunate. So thank you all for participating tonight and throughout the Town Square series. It means a lot to this community and to the process. Let me go through a few ground rules. We've got about, as Becky said, we're going to start right at 7. We've got about 8 minutes before I have to turn it over to Rick. Rick Pearson, by the way, this is how good he is. We planned this about 4 or 5 months ago, and he knew even then that if we finished by 8 o'clock, you'd be able to get home and watch the Cubs game. It's the magic of Rick Pearson. So Pearson, you're good. You're good. But here we have a couple rules tonight that we have to follow because we're on radio. And by the way, this is the first live debate or forum in the gubernatorial race this year. So we're excited about that. So here are the rules that we have to follow, because we want to make sure that the hour is devoted to the discussion and conversation with these 5 individuals. Cell phones and other devices must be set to silent or turned off. Please hold all applause once the broadcast begins at 7 o'clock. The use of photography and recording equipment is prohibited. Media wishing the ability to take photos or record must be registered in advance. The use of flash photography is strictly prohibited. Audience questions were taken in advance online. And with that, we're going to have the candidates come out, and then I'm going to read a short bio on each of them. So if they can come on out, we'll get seated. We'll go down, we'll go through the bio. So you can applaud now. All right, so to my right, to your left, Daniel Biss is currently representing the 9th District in the Illinois State Senate and previously served 1 term in the Illinois House representing the 17th District. At the age of 25, he joined the University of Chicago's mathematics faculty. In 2003, while teaching, Daniel's desire to confront our nation's most critical problems compelled him to get more involved in his community. First as an organizer and now as a state senator, Daniel's top priority has been fighting for middle-class families. He and his wife Karen live in Evanston with their 2 children. Welcome, Daniel. Appreciate you being here. Get the applause in. We've only got about 5 more minutes, and we can't applaud at all. So do it. J.B. Pritzker has spent his life standing up for democratic values, fighting for social and economic justice. J.B. spearheaded the effort to build 1871, a nonprofit small business incubator, which was named one of the leading business incubators in North America. A national leader in early childhood, J.B. was asked by President Obama in 2014 to help organize the White House Summit on Early Childhood Education. J.B. also, in addition to those, has helped support the Center on Wrongful Convictions at Northwestern University, which has become a national leader in reversing miscarriages of justice and helping the falsely accused prove their innocence. Lastly but not least, he led the creation of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. J.B. and MK, his wife of 24 years, are the proud parents of a daughter, Teddy, and a son, Donnie. Welcome, J.B. Chris Kennedy is a Democratic candidate for Illinois governor who ran the Merchandise Mart and is currently leading a privately financed construction project that has brought 2,000 jobs to Illinois. Along with his wife Sheila, Chris runs Top Box Foods, a nonprofit they founded together. Previously, he served as chairman of the University of Illinois Board of Trustees. Chris is the son of the late Senator Robert Kennedy and Ethel Kennedy and is the 8th of their 11 children. He and his wife have 4 children and reside in suburban Chicago. Welcome, Chris. Bob Dibert. Bob is a public official, regional superintendent of schools with over 20 years of experience, a background in education, and a proven record as an advocate for labor. Bob Dibert is running for governor of Illinois to bring about stability to the economic conditions of the state, improve the rights of working men and women, and make government work for the best interests of all citizens, not for special interest. Bob is a candidate for governor, resides in Marine, Illinois, with his wife Karen of 24 years and their 2 sons. While serving as regional superintendent of schools, he was elected by his colleagues to serve as the statewide president. He is a leader in civic and educational initiatives and has developed innovative programs to help at-risk students succeed. As a career and technical teacher, he was able to help young people seek gainful employment and become business owners. Welcome, Bob. Thank you very much. Last but not least, T.O., I got you. T.O. Hardiman was raised in Chicago and graduated from Northeastern University with a master's degree in inner city studies. During his career, T.O. Hardiman served as a community organizer, fundraiser, board chair, recovery home director, and faith-based leader. His passion to educate the masses is second to none, helping reduce shootings and homicides in Chicago by 43% in the Chicago ceasefire zones by hiring ex-offenders, working with high-risk youth, mediating over conflicts, and recruiting professional athletes to speak out against violence. As governor, among other things, Hardeman Teo will focus on resolving pension issues, the pension crisis, reducing state deficit, improving the healthcare system, helping seniors and veterans. Welcome, Teo. So again, as we get close to the magic hour of 7 o'clock, we've got about 3 more minutes. I hate to do this, sound like a parent, but let me go over the rules one more time. Also because I'm trying to kill time. We've got a couple minutes. Cell phones and other devices have got to be turned off, please. No more applause. I know we're here, you got some fans. Everyone's got fans, but can't applaud after 7 o'clock. The use of photography and recording equipment is prohibited. Media wishing, I've told you this, they knew this. Media wishing the ability to take photographs of records must be registered. The use of flash photography is strictly prohibited, and audience questions, as I said earlier, were taken in advance online. And with that, I'm looking for, unless he left, Rick Pearson. He's right here. Welcome, Rick Pearson. Let's give Rick Pearson a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You like that?
Yeah. You good? Yeah. Thank all of you for coming out tonight. That's the most important part. And so go ahead, clear your throats a little bit while we pick up starting in just a couple of minutes. So I will give you the high sign when we're on the air, okay? Good evening. I'm Rick Pearson, and welcome to Creamy Auditorium on the campus of Aurora University, where hundreds of people have gathered tonight for a special Aurora University Town Square Forum, an hour-long discussion with the leading Democratic candidates for governor in conjunction with the Kane County Democratic Organization. As I said, this is a forum. It's not a formal debate, so we're going to try to facilitate a conversation here. We're joined by Daniel Biss, Bob Diber, Teo Hardeman, Chris Kennedy, and J.B. Pritzker. There's no opening or closing statements, so let's get on with this. Gentlemen, earlier today was the announcement of the release of campaign finance disclosure reports in the state by the candidates. You look at the fact of the governor sitting on a $65.6 million war chest. We also look at the fact of Mr. Pritzker, you've put in all but $7,000 of $28.2 million. We look at Chris Kennedy, who's put in over $500,000 and is sitting on a cash balance of $1.3 million. Mr. Biss, you had $2.3 million to start. You're sitting on $2.7 million. Bob Diber has $12,000 and $40,000 in debts. And Teo Hardeman has, in his first report, raised $5,445, $5,000 of which was from himself. Mr. Pritzker, I'd like to start with you, but is this just a rich person's game, or looking at this table, is this just a rich man's game, politics these days, that regular people really can't participate in?
You know, this race is about values. They're about progressive democratic values and what we stand for. I think many of you have seen that I've tried to run a campaign where I've put forward my own ideas and in fact come up with plans for the state of Illinois and try to communicate that with you. It's important to get out and communicate because unfortunately our current governor wrote himself a check at the beginning of December for $50 million, and then he raised another $20 or $30 million.
He got $20 million from Ken Griffin.
He did, and from other wealthy Republicans, and so unfortunately he set us on a course here that I think is going to mean that we Democrats have got to build the infrastructure of the party back, the infrastructure that we've lost. It's important that we knock on doors, that we make sure we're phone banking, that we're, yes, up on the air, but it also means that, you know, we Democrats, we've got to join together to go beat Bruce Rauner. That is the campaign that I'm trying to put together, not just here in the primary, but also for the general election. It's going to be important for us to go out and beat Bruce Rauner, and that's why I've funded this campaign. But one thing you know is that I, am not, beholden to any special interests. My only interest is in the people of Illinois.
Chris Kennedy, you come from a wealthy family.
I thought I did.
Oh, you do.
I think all of us are outraged by the amount of money that is flowing into this race and every race. And I think JB rightly points out that this was started by the Republican Party in Illinois, and we need to respond to what they've done. The notion that you have to be incredibly wealthy to serve in politics, that you have to be incredibly wealthy to serve in government, if that's true, it's the end of American democracy. If that's true, it's the end of American democracy. The great thing that separated this country from every other country in the world was the notion of the American dream. The idea that you could tell your children with a straight face that they could grow up to do anything that they wanted to do in life. If they wanted to grow up to become a policeman or serve as a firefighter, if they wanted to be an astronaut, that they could do all of those things. The question is today, can we say to them, you too can also run for governor, become a congressman, serve as a United States senator, and is that true anymore? We're on the cusp of it not being true, and we need to stop it. We need to rise up in this state and make it clear that anybody can serve in office. You don't need deep pockets, you don't need big bucks, you need strong ideas like JB has said. And it ought to be a clash of ideas.
Thank you. Mr. Biss.
Well, thank you, Rick, for the question. Thank you to Aurora University for hosting. And as much as I appreciate that question, Rick, I was a little sad about the way you asked it, because when you mentioned the contributions that some candidates have made to their own campaigns, you didn't mention mine. But I'm all in too. I donated $25 to my campaign. And then
I think that was below the reporting threshold. That might be why I didn't see it.
And then my wife gave 50, actually. So we're getting up there. We're inching up. I think the future of our democracy is at stake here. We got to decide if we want to have an election or do we want to have an auction. And I think it's true that we have to build that Democratic Party infrastructure, but we don't build it with money. We build it with people. And so I'm building this campaign with people. I'm building this campaign with a movement of people coming together with a hunger to transform the state of Illinois, to build a progressive future for the state of Illinois. And I'm funding the campaign in the same way. And so when you mentioned that we have close to $2.7 million in the bank as of the end of September, that's because of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who understand that if we want a government that works for the rest of us, we have to have a campaign that we all jointly have a stake in. That's how we're going to rebuild the Democratic Party. And by the way, that's how we're going to beat Bruce Rauner, by running a campaign based on that kind of contrast, based on people, and based on a movement to transform our state.
Mr. Dibert, you're the only downstate candidate for governor in the Democratic field from my beloved one-time Edwardsville, Illinois, Madison County Regional Superintendent of Schools, but yet you have to get name recognition, and a sad fact of life is name recognition costs money.
That's true, and that's why we campaign hard each and every day. And, you know, money can do a lot for you in advertisement, but it doesn't do a lot for you in the human factor. So our performance is very essential that each and every time we make a public appearance, that we have the ability to attract voters and supporters to our campaign, and that we are on message as to how we're going to resolve the real issue of the state of Illinois and its financial crisis, and how we're going to move this state forward. You know, I am a living example, I think, of what Chris just mentioned, that an everyday guy, a local elected official, as there are many in this room, can run for governor, and you can do it. It's not as easy as if you've got millions of dollars to finance your campaign. You have to be very clever, you have to be very savvy, you have to know how you're going to target your voters, you have to know how you're going to get your percentages and you've got to get the most bang for the buck. I am proud of the fact that I've outraised J.B. Pritzker. I just found that out, J.B., because I've raised more than 7,000. So that just made me feel real good inside. But all joking aside, we need to be able to allow people, I say all people who are local elected officials who have really good ideas, to be able to serve in the highest level of state government. Many people told me when I made this announcement that it couldn't be done. And I said, you know, the day I made my announcement, if anybody's watched it, I said, the road to Jericho was not an easy route. It was winding, it was twisty, but along the way there was a Good Samaritan. Okay, so I continue to meet those Good Samaritans that are just so valuable that are making my campaign possible.
Thank
that's
you,
how you
Mr.
do
Diber. Mr. Hardiman?
Yeah, that's a good question.
You've run before.
Yes.
You have an idea of what it takes for resources.
For sure. Well, I'm the only candidate that's running for governor that can run for a statewide office. I ran in 2014, and we secured close to 30% of the state vote with about $30,000. Like Mr. Diber was saying, it's all about the people speaking up for what they want to do. I did some math. You only have 17 billionaires that live in Illinois. If all the billionaires support one another, they would have 17 votes, okay? So what I'm talking about here is that I'm the guy that's running for governor. I'm dead serious about it, and we have a 2020 plan for the state. We plan to raise a little bit more money, but right now I want to make this clear to everybody. My staff are circulating petitions throughout the entire state right now, all through the state. I can't even name all the counties right now because it's too many to name. My petitions are being circulated. Our website is doing real good, and we're going to win this election here. I plan to make history by becoming the first candidate that ever defeated big money politics in Illinois. You have a 0 plus 0 times 3 zeros divided by 2 zeros and minus another 0 chance of becoming a billionaire in your lifetime or the next 100 generations of your family's lifetime. Why not support the 99.9% of the working class, middle class, and poor class population for governor of Illinois? I'm a different type of governor. That's my response to you, and we're going all the way.
All right. Gentlemen, another question I wanted to ask all of you. All of you agree on the need to replace Illinois' current flat tax structure, the current state income tax, which for the personal rate is 4.95%. And you want to replace it with a graduated rate based on the amount of income. Can you tell me quickly from all of you, what's the top level tax rate you support and at what income? Mr. Biss?
Obviously, we'd have to sit down and negotiate the exact parameters of the budget, but what I would say is if you look at Illinois and compare us to our neighboring states, there's a very simple pattern. We ask the middle class to pay more, we ask the working poor to pay more, and we ask the richest residents, those who for now generations have been the prime beneficiaries of economic growth, to pay less. In Illinois in 2015, if you were in the bottom fifth, your total state and local tax burden was around 13%. If you were at the bottom, your tax rate was 13%. If you were in the top 1%, you paid 5%. Let me say it again. If you were in the bottom, you paid 13%. If you were in the top, you paid 5%. That's absurd.
So what's the tax rate? What should the tax rate be on higher income wage earners in Illinois? Again,
you need to sit down and work out a budget in negotiation, but I would look, for example, at a neighboring state of Wisconsin. And their top tax bracket, which is paid people who make, I think, close to $500,000 a year, is around 7.65%. So they're able to say, listen, if you're making $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year, you don't pay that tax bracket. But when it gets high enough, someone pays 7.65%, and their income tax brings in way more revenue than ours does. And that tells you there's a way to change our tax code by repealing the flat tax provision that was put in 1970 to benefit the wealthy, and bring in more revenue while the middle class and the working poor get a break.
All right, Senator. Chris Kennedy, where should that upper bracket rate be in Illinois?
So I think it's nearly impossible. I'm sorry, I think it's nearly impossible with Governor Rauner sitting as our governor to answer that question. You're asking us to lead 12 million people. We can't pop one number today and come back a year from now and say, oh no, we're wrong. People cannot react to that kind of leadership. And to ask us to identify a specific number is nearly impossible because Governor Rauner is a libertarian. He doesn't believe in government. When he couldn't privatize it, when he couldn't shrink it, he decided to wound it. To wound it He allowed it to run up a series of unpaid bills with the hope that over time, its only function would be to tax people and pay down that debt. We don't know whether we'll have a budget next year. We don't know with him in charge what he will do to this state. So we can opine on what the tax would be today if he wasn't in charge and we didn't have the risk of his leadership. But honestly, to ask people to commit to a number, I think, is nearly impossible.
Well, I'm not asking anybody to commit to a number, and Mr. Pritzker, this subject has shown up in the past as far as a proposed state constitutional amendment, and one of the problems that it never made it very far in Springfield was because, obviously, no one wants to attach exact rates and enshrine that in part of the Constitution. So people were curious. Well, they could change the number at any time. I'm just curious, what do you think is an acceptable rate of taxation for somebody who's at a higher income level in Illinois?
Well, the first thing you've got to decide is your priorities and whether you're willing to pay for your priorities. In this state, of course, we've significantly underfunded education, starting at early childhood, which is an area that I've spent years, more than 20 years in, and working our way through K-12 education, where we know the governor has unfortunately fought against funding our education system, K-12. He likes to advertise that he's done something, but in fact he stood up against funding our schools. And then, of course, our community colleges and our universities have been just decimated. So it's a high priority for us to make sure that we're stepping up to the plate, keeping our faculty in place.
I didn't hear a rate in here anywhere.
Well, I'm trying to, as the others have noted, you've got to decide what your expenditures are going to be. You know, there are three ways that you've got to balance a budget. There are three components of balancing a budget. You've, of course, got to determine what your expenditures are going to be, and, of course, expanding healthcare, education, and creating jobs. Those are all things that are part of those expenditures that you might put in. And then you've got to have revenues, which is what you're talking about. But remember, there's a third factor here, and it's an extraordinarily important one, and that's growth, because that will help us grow revenues in this state. If we can create jobs, we've got to have growth. And unfortunately, Illinois is in the bottom third of states in the United States in job growth. And that's under this governor who says he's a businessman but does not understand how government works. I've worked in government. I've worked in business. I know the difference.
Mr. Diber, do you have a rate?
Sure, Rick. I'm going to answer the question directly. I've laid out my graduate income tax, progressive income tax scale. It's from 1% to 6%. And I'll tell you the base that I did this on. If you study graduate income taxes, many states have a base of $25,000. 1% of that is $250. So everybody pays $250, that's a wage earner. Now some have asked me, well, in progressive income tax rates, are you going to tax pensions? No, but they pay 1% if they're retired, so that's $250. So there's a lot of revenue that comes from there, about $2 billion of additional revenue from just 1% of those who pay no income tax. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, despite I'm a teacher, as who in this room doesn't pay any income tax.
It's probably not a good idea for a radio program either.
Okay. So here's where I get 6%. 6% is the upper part of the scale. Those are the most wealthy. They can afford to pay it. And the 6% comes from neighboring states' tax rates. Because you're not going to tell me you're going to leave Illinois to go to Missouri because they got lower taxes, because they got a 6% rate. So you've got a rate from 1% to 6% based upon the income of the state, based upon the wealth of this state. The people in the middle will actually save money, because you will not go over 4.95% of those individuals who are currently making between $45,000 and $160,000. Those are middle income tax wage earners. When you cross $160,000 to $175,000, for those of us that have kids in college like I do, that's the break line for FAFSA right now. So, and we're in an institution of higher learning, so if you're filing for FAFSA, you make over $175,000, naturally you're going into an upper income bracket, and that's the rationale that I'm basing my graduated tax scale on, is other research data that makes sense as to who are classified income tax levels. I say anyone that is making over $1 million goes to 6%.
Thank you, Mr. Diver.
Yeah.
Mr. Hardiman.
And then the Hardiman and Avery campaign, my running mate, her name is Patricia Avery. She's the former president of the NAACP in Champaign-Urbana and a former county commissioner for 20 years in Champaign-Urbana. I concur with Mr. Bob Diver. My thing would be 1% to 10%, but 7 to 10% would be for the wealthier people, because the wealthier people in Illinois do not have a history of paying their fair share of taxes. So we're pushing a progressive tax, dealing with the income status, but that would be a direct answer to your question. And then also the financial business transaction tax in Chicago, with Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the Chicago Board of Options and the Chicago Board of Trade, that can bring in $3 billion of new revenue to the state of Illinois. So that's why I stand on that.
Rick, can I make a point of clarification? My scale was 1 to 6%, not 1 to 10.
Understood, understood. You know, we've talked about, I think, and you at the various multitude of forums that you've all appeared at have talked about various areas of need for more spending in areas like social services, like education, even part of a reformation of the tax system to make it less property tax dependent when it comes to our schools. But is there one place you can name right now that you would cut state spending? Mr. Diver.
Sure, I stated in Capital Facts. I think the message got out. I said I would cut the Secretary of Education's job. She resigned already, so I wouldn't even have to do that. So I didn't think that position
was even budgeted to education.
Well, I don't care, but I think it was Department of Human Services. But I'd say the state $250,000 tomorrow morning, because that position would be gone, as would be some other positions that are duplicated administrative services in the state of Illinois. So that's where I begin. I also begin looking at making cost-saving measures on budget reductions in related state expenditures that don't yield results. Okay, so my entire budget would be results-driven.
All right, thank you, Mr. Diver. Mr. Pritzker.
Well, remember that Bruce Rauner spent almost $350 million so far trying to reform the state's information technology, and yet there literally has been nothing to show for it. So there's been a ton of wasted spending. And don't forget, this is a governor that for 2 years and 6 days overspent, in fact, deficit spent $600 million per month because he was unwilling to agree to a budget in Springfield. So he's the biggest wasteful spender that we've had. Now, it's important to recognize there's a difference in government between an investment and an expense, and I don't think this governor understands that. For example, it's an investment to focus on improving our education system, particularly universal preschool, which is something that I believe strongly in. It's an investment because the return on that investment to the taxpayers is significant. The dollars that you invest in those early years yield results because kids are much more likely to graduate from high school, to go to college and graduate from college, to not be incarcerated, to go get a job. Those are all real returns for the state of Illinois. And to be honest with you, I believe that this governor does not understand that difference between an investment and an expense, despite the fact that he came out of business, but it's because he's never spent any time in government.
Mr. Kennedy.
So I think that list is incredibly long, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's issues like just combining the controller's office with the treasurer's office. There's no need to have both of those in the state of Illinois. Probably the lowest hanging fruit, the quickest way to improve our financial situation is just to refinance our debt. And Governor Rauner doesn't do that because he's trying to bankrupt essentially the state's function. So he doesn't do what anybody else in the financial industry would do. And if he did that, we'd save millions and millions of dollars. The greatest thing that we could do is start to combine layers of government, to eliminate layers of government. That's like an obvious suggestion. Everybody's going to tell you we should do that. It's never going to happen if we continue to allow our elected officials to operate with massive conflicts of interest. What occurs in the state is elected officials are hired by other units of government to represent them as lobbyists. They're lobbying for other units of government. When you lobby for another unit of government, you have no interest in getting rid of that unit of government. That's what's preserving the highest per capita unit of government system in the United States. And we need to ban those elected officials from having that sort of conflict of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Hardiman.
Yeah, what I'm looking at as far as cuts, and I concur with the gentleman sitting up here as well, it's hard to make some real drastic cuts because you have to take a look at all the departments across the state of Illinois. But what I'm looking at with the progressive tax and the business financial transaction tax, we would not have to make so many cuts because we would have new revenue coming into the state. That's $5 billion a year combined revenue for 4 years under Hardiman and Avery administration. But one area that I am looking at is the Illinois Department of Corrections. What I would like to do is take a look at the minimum security penitentiaries and try to convert those into institutions of higher learning so we can reduce the recidivism rate here in Illinois. Right now we have about 52,000 inmates in prison right now. The recidivism rate in Illinois is around 53 to 54%. So we have to find a way to do something different with the lower level offenders in Illinois, especially a lot of people that have been locked up for small amounts of marijuana, low-level drug cases, and some other type of cases. So I would take a look at the Illinois Department of Corrections budget and maybe make some cuts there, but that's not going to solve the entire issue. And like JB said, what Bruce Rounder's doing, he's just stacking up bills to try to make the state look so bad. We have a $60 billion budget. The state is not broke. We just need the right person in the governor's office that's going to take care of business on a higher level. That's what I would cut.
Well, first of all, this was kind of alluded to, but let me be very direct. We are wasting insane amounts of money servicing our debt right now. It's insane. It's an absurd amount of money going right in the pockets of Wall Street while we're laying off social workers and mental health care providers. So if you fix your budget and you stop paying this kind of interest on debt, and by the way, you decrease your borrowing costs, you've done away with that completely unnecessary and wasteful cost. Now, the other thing I would say, though, is that we tend to have conversations about how to reduce government spending in a way that, in my opinion, is not very constructive. You've got the whole budget there, it's a giant spreadsheet, and people are trying to figure out which number you make less. You're going to go after mental health today, you're going to go after schools tomorrow, you're going to go after community colleges the next day. Every time you reduce one of those areas of programmatic spending, you're not making government work better, you're just starving it of resources. The way to think about this is to figure out how to make government actually work better. So for example, in Illinois, we've got 7,000 units of local government. That's 2,000 more than any other state. I passed a law to allow the township of Evanston, where I live, to merge in with the city of Evanston. So now I guess we've got 6,999 units of government. Here's what happened when they merged. There was $250,000 of administrative overhead that is no longer being spent. But it wasn't just that. The services got better because all of a sudden the people in the two agencies were talking to each other about how to serve their constituents jointly. And so if you do the difficult work, the meticulous work of actually making government work in a streamlined, integrated way, it's not just about reducing a number in a spreadsheet. It's about having a government that we can afford, yes, but it's also about having a government that works for the people. I think it's about time we had that in the state of Illinois.
Very quickly here, I want a response from each of you about considering the latest moves by the Trump administration involving the Deferred Action Immigration Status Program. This is a question from a student here at Aurora University. How would you address that as governor? Should we be having sanctuary-type cities and municipalities, something that Governor Rauner said he thinks this should be something that's federal action that individual states and municipalities shouldn't be doing? And how would you address this issue of dealing with dreamers? 30 seconds. Senator Biss.
All right, I'll be really quick. Here's life with Trump. Life with Trump is a series of moral tests that we are subjected to. And this is one of those moral tests. We're being asked, are we going to do what's right to protect vulnerable people who are under attack? Or are we going to just listen to the bottom line and save dollars? When I'm governor, the state of Illinois is going to follow the moral path and not the fiscally convenient path.
Mr. Pritzker.
There's no one on the stage that fought harder against Donald Trump last year and continuing into this year than I have. I knocked on doors and phone banked and gave money and raised money and went on national television calling him what he is, which is a racist and a xenophobe. And he continues to prove that every single day in office. Now, we ought to have a welcoming state here for immigrants. We have a governor today who stood up in 2015 and said he didn't want any Syrian refugees. In Pennsylvania, they had a governor who went to the airport and actually welcomed the Syrian refugees to his state. I want to have a state where immigrants feel welcome and secure, and that's why I have been outspoken about standing up for the Trust Act, which finally,
Thank you, Mr. Pritzker.
Governor Rauner signed.
Mr. Kennedy.
Say that the reality is there's no great event in American history that did not occur until after people got active. Women did not get the right to vote till women took to the street. We didn't get the Civil Rights Act until Martin Luther King marched on Washington. We didn't stop the Vietnam War until kids shut down universities. With Trump, we need to fight him in the courts, fight him in the street, and beat him in the polls.
Mr. Diber?
My answer is yes. I would uphold Illinois being a sanctuary state at whole, and I supported the Trust Act. And I'll tell you specifically why. Is because I come from a part of the state of Illinois where one of the largest geographic demographics, excuse me, I'll get it out. The demographics is that these are first-generation immigrants. They're Hispanics. And these young people were born on this soil. They are citizens. And I will tell you, if their parents had to leave, we would become a state of orphans, and we would be required to take care of those.
Thank you, Mr.
people.
Diber. Mr. Hardiman.
I support the Trust Act as well, and I also support Illinois being a sanctuary state. And the reason I say that because I did my DNA. I'm 80% African American. My ancestors came over here on slave ships, and I'm 20% Latino. So I support all people that have come to the United States because the reality is this. Everybody keeps talking about fighting Trump. I want everybody to hear this clearly if you don't mind. Trump is going to be the president for the next 3 years, 3.5 years. He's in office now. We need to make things right in Illinois for people right now. We need to stand up to Mike Madigan. We need to stand up to machine politics in Illinois to get the job done right now in Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Hardiman.
I just want to add that.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're listening to a forum from Aurora University, a discussion with the leading Democratic candidates for governor. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on WGN. Welcome back to Aurora University. I'm Rick Pierce from the Chicago Tribune. This is a town square forum, a conversation with the leading Democratic candidates for governor. And we're going to continue now for the next half hour, and we'll try to get through a few more questions and maybe some quicker answers. But Theo Hardiman alluded to this in his last response. Speaker Madigan, Speaker Madigan, Speaker Madigan. If Governor Rauner has perhaps had one of his greatest successes, I think even you would agree, it's been to demonize Democratic House Speaker Michael Madigan. Should he stay? Should legislative leaders have term limits? How would you make sure that if you're elected, he wouldn't run you, Chris Kennedy?
I don't think that's going to be a problem for
Tell me.
I don't think that I don't think that what Speaker Madigan is doing is illegal. I just think it should be. So he's a property tax appeals lawyer. He's a state rep, and he's a property tax appeals lawyer. And the problem with that is that it leads to us holding on to a system where we fund our schools with property taxes. If we want great outcomes, we have to fund them with a progressive graduated income tax. 100% of state reps know that. 100% of state senators know that. Every Democrat knows that. The Democrats had a supermajority in the House, a supermajority in the Senate, controlled the governor's mansion, did nothing to move our state.
Should we get rid of the property tax? Or should local units of government have an option to be able to
They should
pay
have an
more?
option, but the fact is we did not move that way because Mike Madigan makes money on a system that's destroying our schools. And when it destroys our schools, it robs our kids of a future. It's wrecking our economy, and it will destroy our state. And if we don't stop it, terrible things are going to happen, and we need to make it end.
Senator Biss, you haven't been shy about saying you think Mike Madigan's been around too long.
That's right. Mike Madigan's been around too long. Mike Madigan's too powerful. I think that power holds back the state of Illinois, and frankly, as a very proud Democrat, I think it holds back the Democratic Party in Illinois as well. And that's why, since long before I'd ever heard of Governor Rauner, back in the blissful days of my life, I was running for office on a platform of limiting how long someone can serve as Speaker of the House. That's just the right thing to do, and I introduced constitutional amendments multiple times during my time as a state legislator to do just that. But let me say one more thing. We have a broken system here. And I think if we get too obsessed with just one person who has manipulated the system but did not create it, and then we don't fix the system but just get rid of him, we're going to be disappointed by how little changes. Yes, Mike Madigan's been there too long, and yes, he's too powerful, and yes, it's time for him to go, but we've got to get to the root of the problem and reform our system by building a people's movement that can genuinely pressure the legislature to finally act in the public interest, and that's what my campaign is all about.
Mr. Pritzker.
Well, I've been an independent...
I'll repeat the individual questions if you want.
No, I think I got
it.
Look, I've been an independent progressive leader for my whole life, and that's not going to change when I go to Springfield if I get elected governor. But, you know, there are things that I'll agree with Mike Madigan about, and there are things that I'll disagree with the Speaker about. For example, I'm in favor of independently drawn legislative maps. I think we should have more competitive elections for the people of Illinois to make choices in. I'm in favor of leadership term limits, which would limit the Speaker's term. I think those are things that probably the Speaker of the House doesn't agree with me about. But
has he been around too long?
Bruce Rauner, he's been around an awful long time.
I know. Is it too long?
I think leadership term limits is really an answer to that question. Unlike Bruce Rauner, I'll work with the Speaker, whoever the Speaker is, by the way. I'll work with the Speaker on the things that really matter and are important to the people of Illinois, and there's no chance that I'm going to be working for the Speaker. The only people I'm going to work for are the people of Illinois.
Mr. Dibert.
Well, first of all, I'm in favor of leadership term limits because I believe if they are enacted, it begins to set a parameter on how long leadership is in total control. And I think that that's the issue that the general public in Illinois is discussing. But how do I feel about Mike Madigan? Well, annually I say hi to him, I shake hands with him, he knows me, I know him, and I look forward to working with him. Because I'll tell you what, I'm going to give this guy a lot of credit. This guy's accomplished a tremendous lot for the state of Illinois and isn't given any credit for it. He has held Illinois together in difficult times. He overrode the governor's veto, so we had a budget. He got an education bill passed so that we opened our schools, and here we are again tonight bashing Speaker Mike Madigan. So I give people credit where credit's deserved, so tonight I'm going to take my hat off to him and just make this statement that I respect the man. I respect him for all that he's done for as long as he's been in the legislature. Now, do I think he's been there too long? That's up to the people to decide. If they re-elect him, then the answer is no, he's not been there too long. But if you want him to go, you got to take him out of office, and he's elected by his constituents.
Mr. Hardeman.
No, I support term limits for elected officials, and it wasn't just Mike Madigan that helped the state move forward. It was the entire General Assembly. So we have to give credit to all the members of the General Assembly, the senators and the state representatives. But I would have to work with Mike Madigan, regardless how I feel about him holding the state hostage. What Bruce Rauner ran into is a conflict with seniority and big money with Mike Madigan. And Bruce Rauner thought he was going to shake up Springfield, but what he did, he shook up the poor and working class people instead. Mike Madigan is there. I believe when I become governor, Mike Madigan might retire, though. If I become governor, he may retire. But at the same time, if he's there, if he's a speaker, I would have to work with him and help the state move forward. That's my answer.
Okay, very quickly here, this from an Aurora University student. Of course, during the state's budget impasse, we saw the toll that higher education was taking from Illinois with the lack of financial support. How do you see restoring confidence in college and university education in Illinois? The governor was just on CNBC the other day saying that Illinois' higher education system was second to none, even though I believe we have 5 universities that are in junk bond status as a result of the financial impasse. How do you restore confidence in getting a higher education in Illinois, as well as what do you see as the future of the Monetary Award MAP grant program? Sorry, but please be brief. Senator Biss.
Well, thanks for mentioning the MAP program. We're here on the campus of a private university, and some people don't realize how much private universities were harmed as well by this governor's budget crisis. I tell people Bruce Rauner's been a really bad governor for the state of Illinois, but the University of Wisconsin never had a better governor than Bruce Rauner. He has expelled our students from the state and moved them elsewhere, and we have to start by passing a normal, sane budget that properly funds our universities and community colleges, and then we have to start increasing our investment to move to free tuition at public universities and community colleges.
Chris Kennedy.
Say the greatest economic engine we have in the state is our system of public higher education. The same thing that drives success in the great economies of the United States, in Silicon Valley, in Austin, Texas, in Research Triangle, North Carolina, in Boston, Massachusetts, in Pittsburgh, is the system of higher education, public research universities that they have and they support. If we support our great research universities in this state, we'll have the best economy there is in America.
Bob Diber.
Well, first and foremost, we have to rebuild Illinois' higher education system because this administration has allowed it to crumble. It's terrible when you go to Western Illinois University and you learn that professors there are being asked to take furlough days. The same at Eastern Illinois University. Southern Illinois University at Carbondale's in such bad financial shape they're borrowing money from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville to make payroll. You know, so our university system in the state of Illinois has to be rebuilt to keep young people in Illinois because they are leaving. 16,000 left last year to go elsewhere. They'll never come back here to raise a family, pay taxes, and be a wage earner in this state. And we have got to change that, and we're going to have to rebuild higher ed in the next 4 years.
J.B. Pritzker.
We've got the most educated, dedicated workforce in the entire nation here in this state, and that's no thanks to Bruce Rauner. His budget cuts, frankly, his unwillingness to fund our higher education has let faculty leave the state. There are 72,000 fewer kids going to school in Illinois under Bruce Rauner. Now remember, when they leave our state, they are 70% likely to stay where they went to and not come back to the state of Illinois. Remember, these are our kids, but they're also our future, our economic future in this state. These are the folks who are going to create jobs and who are going to, frankly, help us grow this economy. It's got to be a focus in this state on rebuilding our university education, our community colleges, not just because we're going to create jobs rebuilding it, but also because the people who graduate are our best economic resources.
Theo Hardeman.
Yeah, the Hardeman and Avery administration, we support really free college tuition for college students up until the bachelor's degree level, so that they can, when it comes down to obtaining your master's degree, they would have to probably pay for that. But I know how it is to owe a student loan. I've been through that process in my life many years ago, so we definitely support, and the way to pay for it is out of the financial transaction tax downtown Chicago. That's how we would pay for free college tuition for college students, okay, to boost higher education.
There's been a lot of criticism among the various campaigns here about who's an insider and who's an outsider in this race, and who is the outsider. Having a Republican governor who is an outsider, why is a Democratic outsider better? J.B. Pritzker.
Well, let's be clear. I'm nothing like Bruce Rauner. As a progressive Democrat, I have spent a lifetime fighting for those values. For example, there are 230,000 kids in the state of Illinois who get school breakfast because I helped to expand President Obama's program called No Kid Hungry all across the state in low-income school districts.
But are you an outsider?
And yes, and what I'm trying to tell you is I've accomplished a great deal. In fact, I've gone after really big things for the people of Illinois, frankly, without much help from the government of Illinois or the politicians in Illinois, but I have worked hard to make sure sure that we're all driving toward these big things. Building a Holocaust museum that serves more than 60,000 kids who learn to fight bigotry and hatred and intolerance every single year, and thousands of teachers. Those are all big things to accomplish for the state of Illinois. That makes me the biggest outsider in this race, that I have accomplished those things without serving for many years in government or answering to the leaders in Springfield.
Senator Biss.
Here's what I think we want. I think we want someone who's not beholden to the system. I think we shouldn't elect Mike Madigan's candidate for governor because I think we need a governor who's independent of Mike Madigan. I think we need someone who understands how government works as well. I think we need someone who does not feel owned by the system but knows how to operate within the system. I think with Bruce Rauner as our governor and Donald Trump as our president, we need someone with experience passing bills. I think we have enough inexperienced businessmen in government. I think it's time to try a different approach. But the person who we put in should be someone who knows how to stand up to the entrenched interests that have not served the public. If Mike Madigan had his way, I never would have been a legislator in the first place. He didn't get his way. If he gets his way now, I'm not going to be governor. He's not going to get his way then either. And then we're going to have a government who's responsive to the people of Illinois, not the system that has failed the people of Illinois.
Bob Dibert.
Well, I served in government for 22 years, so I guess you could say I'm an insider. But I don't think that I'm the chosen one in this race. All right, I look at myself as the outsider. I look at myself as the local elected official who stood up with the courage and said that we need to change Illinois. And we need to change Illinois for the everyday person. We need to change Illinois for local elected officials to make sure that they get what they need to operate their communities and their counties. So in saying that, I look at myself as the outsider in the race. Anyone that's self-funded at a low amount of money is definitely not getting any inside money. So look at my financial records. So that is how you judge who is an insider, who is an outsider.
Chris Kennedy.
There are 30 high schools in Chicago alone where the average ACT score is a 14 or a 15. 75% of the kids who graduate any public high school in the state of Illinois go to a school that's so underfunded that they become so undereducated that they can't go to community college or university without remedial education. When I graduated from high school and college, we moved to where the jobs were. Now the jobs are moving to where the highly educated kids are. If we don't produce them, we put our economy at risk. We have terrible educational outcomes for our kids because we pay for our schools with property taxes. We pay for our schools with property taxes because our senior elected officials, our property tax appeals lawyers, making money on a system, destroying our education, wrecking our kids' futures, dooming them to a life of economic servitude, and wrecking our state. You can make up your mind whether I'm the insider or the outsider.
So, you want me to answer the question?
I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
Apologize.
Well, that makes me an outsider. Check it out.
You're on the outside end of that
That's right.
table.
No, you're okay.
I'm
That's
sorry.
my friend. We're good. This is the reality with T.O. Hardeman. I'm definitely an outsider. I'm running to become the first black governor of the state of Illinois. I'm not saying that because I'm African American. I'm saying it because I'm qualified. I don't have no ties to machine politics. Anytime you've been endorsed by the machine, that actually makes you an insider, okay? If you've been endorsed by the machine, you've been endorsed by most of the, the politicians throughout the state, that makes you an insider. That's the reality. But just to answer your question, I'm an outsider, but I plan to work with everybody because you must be a problem solver once you become the governor. You must be a problem solver. And last but not least, I was at a forum, at the Environmental Forum. It was an all-white audience, and they say, T.O., what are you going to do about white privilege when you become governor? I say the solution to white privilege is standing right in front of you. Help me become the governor, and we can end a lot of that. And that's no slight to nobody. I love all people. I want to make that crystal clear, but I'm definitely an outsider, to make a long story short.
All right, gentlemen, we all know about the gun violence that's so prevalent in Chicago. We've seen these repeated incidents of mass shootings at a national level again and again. The root causes of Chicago's violence are multifold. But if you became governor, very quickly here, what's the first thing you think you could accomplish as governor to try to make a difference? Chris Kennedy?
The issues around gun violence have affected my family personally, and I think about them every day of the campaign. And people share their stories with me. We've laid out a 8-point plan to try to reduce violence in our city.
But what's number one? What's the number one thing that you could do as governor?
Well, we need to restore the funding so that in places like Chicago, where we're operating with 1,000 fewer police officers on the street than we were 10 years ago, when you reduce the number of police officers, crime goes up. But to reduce the gun violence program, and I have to say, okay, you get one answer, 1 second, here's your one thing, the most important thing that's destroying people's lives. It's killed hundreds of people this year. The bullet that kills the father wounds the son. So to say that we're going to reduce this topic to a 10-second answer, I think, is to diminish the subject below where it needs to be.
Theo Hardiman.
Yes, when I used to oversee ceasefire, we actually reduced homicides in Chicago by about 43 to 80% in some of Chicago's toughest communities. I would like to say this because I'm a straight-up person when I talk to my people. You're not going to stop no killings in Chicago anytime, anywhere, until black men unify and address the issues in their community. I say this based on the numbers. In Chicago, over the last 20 years, there's been 450 to over 700 homicides every year. Even though they had a lot of police, they had police overtime, all these special programs. You cannot stop killing. And I say it this way because over 85% of the killings that occur in Chicago take place in the African American community and some of the Latino communities. We must make this a priority. And as your governor, I plan to command an audience with all the young guys from the streets of Chicago, Decatur, Peoria, East St. Louis, and make sure that I talk with them about ways to work with them to stop the killings. I'm the only person sitting on this panel that has an expertise in reducing shootings and homicides, and it takes place one person at a time, one family at a time, because we don't have a gang problem like we used to, and quickly. The homicide clearance rate in Chicago is only 28%, which means that people get away with homicide 72% of the time. So I have a strong plan to reduce killings in Chicago by taking the message straight to the people, and I've done it before, and it definitely works.
Thank
and
you,
it's
Mr.
a public
Hardiman.
health model as well, public health model.
Senator Biss.
I strongly agree with Chris. I think that there is no one answer to this question, and if we do one thing, no matter how great that thing is, we will fail. But I also want to respect the premise of the question, so I'll tell you where I would start. The first thing, and it may not be popular, but it's the truth. Invest directly to create jobs in communities, not just in the city of Chicago, but across the state of Illinois that have been the victims of generations of disinvestment, where a school got closed, and then a plant left, and then some not-for-profits left. And as the dollars left, the jobs left. And as the jobs left, the people left. And what remains is hopelessness. And there are a million theories and a million training programs and a million philosophies about how to help create jobs in communities that have suffered in this way. But the way to start is to hire people. The way to start is for the state to step in and directly put resources in to put people to work, to begin to spark economic revitalization of communities where hope has been left behind. If you don't tackle the job problem, the violence problem cannot be solved.
J.B. Pritzker.
Well, of course, we've got to create jobs, and in fact, I put a plan out for doing exactly that in low-income communities all across the state of Illinois. But you've got to recognize that before you get to jobs, you have got to restore the safety net in this state. There are too many people who are falling through the cracks that Bruce Rauner has put in that safety net. That, if you want to pick the one thing that has most contributed to gun violence all across the state, and by the way, let's not forget domestic violence. If you want to pick the one thing, it's the fact that we did not fund for 2 years and 6 days the safety net, the services that people need all across the state, particularly in those violence-ravaged communities.
Bob Diber.
Well, the first thing that I would do as governor, I would sign Senator Harman's bill, which is a gun dealer's licensing act, because Illinois does not have a registration of the people who deal in guns. So therefore, if you do the trace as to how guns get in our street, a lot of them are just car trunk sales, and that's how it's taken place. And they're coming in from all over, from Indiana, from Missouri, from Kentucky, etc. And we've got to stop this, okay? But first and foremost, the thing that disturbs me most is why do we have 13-year-old kids shooting one another? And I instituted a program a year ago because of gun violence, and it's called Give 30. It's a mentoring program in which all of you in this room could help stop gun violence by mentoring at-risk youth who have no hope, whose hope is to get a gun to protect themselves because that's how they see themselves empowered. And they come from a walk of life in which they don't see hope. They don't see a future, okay? So we have to change that. We have to change that culture. And that's done one child at a time, and that's done by people who can inspire young people to do great things other than become involved in violence. Look at Give 30.
Mr. Diver, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to hold you right there. Gentlemen, this could be our last question of the evening. All in all, there seems to be very little daylight between all of you on many of the substantive issues. You may disagree with me on that, but that's my interpretation. Tell us in the audience, what's the one thing that truly separates you from the rest of the field? And we're just going to go right down the table, starting with State Senator Daniel Biss.
I'll end where we started. Our democracy is in crisis. We have to decide if we're going to have elections or auctions. We have to decide if we're going to look at a situation where Donald Trump got elected president and Bruce Rauner got elected governor, and the Democratic Party asking itself who it's going to be, who we're going to be. Do we say, yeah, let's do some more of that? Or do we pick a different path forward? I'm not a billionaire, I'm not a millionaire. I live a middle-class life. My kids go to their neighborhood public school. They share a bedroom. But I know how to fight for ordinary people. I've passed 80 laws in Springfield, building coalitions people didn't think were going to get built, defeating special interests people thought couldn't get beaten. I think we've got to ask who we are as a party. And the answer that we give in this election, in this moment, is going to reverberate around the country, and it's going to reverberate across the decades.
Thank you, Senator Biss. Mr. Pritzker.
Well, I'd like to begin simply by thanking Aurora University and Rick Pearson and the leaders here and all of you in the audience. Let me say that the most important difference that I bring to this race is I've gotten real things done, big things for people all across the state of Illinois. I've spent decades doing it. I think it's worth asking about all the candidates. What were you doing when nobody was watching, when you weren't running for public office, to really improve the lives of the people of Illinois? And I've talked about some of the things that I've done, expanding the school breakfast program to low-income kids across the state, early childhood education for thousands of kids, quality preschool and quality child care, building a Holocaust museum, opening 1871, 7,000 jobs created. Those were all things that I did, but I didn't do those by writing a check. I did those by organizing, by bringing the leaders together. We're talking about elected leaders and nonprofit leaders and ordinary Illinoisans who care deeply about those issues, and leading and providing vision, and then everybody pull on the oar together, and that's what I'll do in Springfield as your governor.
Chris Kennedy.
I'll fight for the future of this state. More jobs, more companies have moved to Illinois to open an office for the first time in the Merchandise Mart Center than any other location in the state. I know what it takes to get companies to move here and to expand once they arrive. They want access to great minds. The reason people are moving into downtown Chicago is the largest college town in America. But we need to fuel that. And we cannot build an economy when 75% of our kids need remedial education before they go to community college or to university or to trade school. We have those bad outcomes because our elected officials make money on that system. And I'm going to stand up to them. I'm going to go to them and make it illegal for elected officials to have outside jobs that are adverse to the interest of the body they were elected to serve.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Hardiman.
Well, I'm different because I'm a progressive Democrat. I know what it takes to go to school at night, work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. I've worked on all levels in society. God has blessed me. I was born and raised in the heart of the ghetto, but God has blessed me in my career. I've sat down in sessions with former Prime Minister David Cameron during my career, Queen Northam Jordan, not just to try to hype nothing, but just I've been around good people. We all come from royalty, and I plan to really represent everybody in the state of Illinois. That's what makes me different. We have a 2020 plan, which represents a perfect vision for the people of Illinois, which includes supporting the seniors, the college students, the veterans, the young children, everybody, the mental health community.
Thank you, Mr. Hardiman.
That's it? All right, well, all right, good enough.
Mr. Diber.
What differentiates me is I'm the only downstate candidate. I'm the first person in 20 years to have the courage to do this, to run from downstate for governor. My campaign is to unite all of Illinois, to bring downstate with Chicago, connect us together. For 22 years, I've served in local government. I understand that governing is an art. It's something that takes a personal skill to bring people together in the General Assembly. That's what I will do. I'm also the only candidate who's been president of a union. I've bargained contracts. I've sat on both sides of the table. I'm also the only candidate that comes from a farm family, still actively involved. I own a Centennial Farm. I understand the largest industry in Illinois and been involved in it for over 100 years. My family has.
Thank you, Mr. Diber. That's all we have time for in this special forum of the leading Democratic contenders. Let's give them all a big round of applause. Daniel Bisk, Chris Kennedy, Bob Diber, J.B. Pritzker, and Theo Hardiman. Special thanks for this broadcast to Aurora University, its president, Dr. Rebecca Sherrick, Tom Cross, and the Kane County Democratic Organization and Chairman Mark Gately. I'm Rick Pearson of the Chicago Tribune. Thank you for listening. This is Chicago's very own WGN AM 720 Chicago and WGNradio.com. If you have an Amazon Echo, just say play WGN Radio on TuneIn. We've gone past 8 o'clock. Time for the news. Here's Rob Martier. Thank you, thank you, thank you.